Welcome to A Night for Truth, a series of conversations with Dr. Alice von Hildebrand on the life and work of her husband, Dietrich von Hildebrand, one of the great Catholic thinkers and writers of the 20th century. In our last conversation, we had come up to a point, I think, Lily, where we were speaking, not for the first time, actually, but it's a crucial point in your husband's work and in his whole vision, it seems to me, this question which he insisted on, quite rightly, on the objectivity of truth as opposed to the swamp of subjectivity we're in now. Put that way, it might sound to an audience as though, well, this is something just to be discussed in the classroom or among philosophers. Objectivity, subjectivity, what does that mean for us in our ordinary round? And I might say none of us is very far from the question, no matter who we are, what our work is, what our household is like. It shows up in 100,000 ways. For example, when someone says, oh, well, I don't resonate to that, or that doesn't turn me on, or that's not my scene. If, for example, the music of J.S. Bach is being talked about, or if moral questions are being spoken of, someone will say, well, you have your morality, I have mine. Right there is the issue, a real watershed issue that Dietrich von Hildebrand speaks so eloquently about, the objectivity of truth. Maybe you could give us some summary comments on that, because we want to move on to his work on love and marriage.
I mentioned in a previous episode that already as a young boy, my husband had received the grace to be totally convinced of the objectivity of truth and moral values. I mean that he defended it with every possible argument, and very powerful argument for a young boy. He was also convinced of the immortality of the soul. And he relates in his memoirs that when he was 14, his oldest beloved sister, Nini, gave birth to a boy. And, of course, he visited her, and out of the blue sky she said to him, you know, I don't quite understand why people should be concerned about whether or not they have an immortal soul. What difference does it make? And the boy said, Nini, how can you say something so stupid? Don't you understand the question of whether or not we have an immortal soul is crucial? He was 14. He was 14. I know exactly because I know the date of the birth of his nephew. Mm-hmm. And, you know, these were deep-set convictions which he backed up by reasoning. When he was 15, he read Plato in Greek. And at that moment, he was so enthused by the greatness of Plato's mind, and he declared to his mother, I'm going to become a philosopher. You know, this is my one vocation, to devote myself to pursuing truth and fighting for the objectivity of truth. And
it seems to me that we, readers of the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand, are the beneficiaries of this incredible clarity and incisiveness of mind which he exhibited as a young boy, not only when he was 14, but I love the incident when he was 5 and stood up in his crib or on a chair or whatever it was and said, Jesus Christ is God. He was a pagan. He was in a pagan household.
He was not yet baptized.
He was not yet baptized. And I think that one of the lively things about your husband, his life, his person, his work, is that even though he was a philosopher and a thinker of the most exalted order who would leave the rest of us in the weeds, nevertheless, nothing that he wrote was merely abstract. Nothing that he wrote was just for intellectuals to pass the time of day talking about. You can't read a paragraph of Transformation in Christ, for example, or the Liturgy and Personality without realizing, my goodness, this touches me right here. This is a portrait of me. And I think that on this question of the objectivity of truth, which, if that sounds like a difficult philosophical category to anyone whose philosophy is a little rusty, it simply means that what is, that what is there, and I, as a mortal, I, as a finite creature, am addressed by it. I don't chart, I don't determine the orbits of the planets or the sun. I mean, the sun comes up in the east whether I like it or not. I am mortal whether I like it or not. The tide comes in and the tide goes out, quite without consulting me. And your husband was profoundly conscious of this, which seems like a simple thing, and yet it's amazing how our own era has decided to challenge that.
I'll get to that in a moment, but it was for him a great blessing that he made his PhD in Göttingen at the Phenomenological School, because Husserl, who was a totally unknown philosopher, thinker, wrote a book at the turn of the century called Logical Investigations.
This is Husserl, the well-known German philosopher at the University of Göttingen.
And founder of the so-called Phenomenological School. And this book was amazing and revolutionary, because the climate in Germany was totally and absolutely subjectivistic. Wherever you went, university was dominated by subjectivism. And all of a sudden, this unknown professor stands up for the objectivity of truth. And his work was discovered by someone very talented, and all of a sudden, some of the very young, talented minds in Germany flocked to Göttingen. That is also one of the reasons why Edith Stein were there. And even though Husserl was a very bad teacher, apparently his teaching was boring, he always mummed by himself, he didn't prepare his classes and so on and so on. Nevertheless, this one book was absolutely decisive. Unfortunately, later he changed his position. But he had an assistant of the name of Adolf Reinach. And this young professor was in his 30s, was brilliant, he was Jewish, and simultaneously he was incredibly talented, and a clear, clean personality, very, very truth-centered. And he was the one who actually formed my husband. Unfortunately, he died in the First World War. But what is interesting is that Göttingen sort of deepened and strengthened the position that he had all along, that the objectivity of truth can be discovered. Truth is there. As you say, reality exists. There are facts. And man's mind is capable of grasping it and giving the proper response, but there are certain conditions that must be fulfilled. And one of the things that phenomenology does is to challenge the thinker or the student to eliminate prejudices. And I'm sorry to say that all of us have prejudices, whether we know it or not. There are certain things that we prejudge. And therefore a certain purification of the mind must take place before I'm capable of understanding or perceiving certain things. You know, obviously, if I'm nearsighted, there are certain things I'm not going to see. Now, to deny that they exist because they don't see it is plain stupidity. You know, the fact that I don't see an object doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but if I do see it, that it must exist. And, you know, this whole phenomenological training has led my husband to a discovery of something very crucial, in which he's going to work his whole life long. I'm referring to his habilitation, which was written in 1718 of the century, but he kept developing it throughout his life. And this is what he calls moral blindness, because you will notice that the domain in which we are mostly blind is in the domain of ethics and morality. And for a very plain reason, you know that if I study geometry, and Euclid convinces me that the sum of the angle of a triangle are equal to two right angles, I have no subjective reason for challenging it. He gives his arguments, he proves it, and I accept it. Now just imagine how ridiculous it would be if you meet a friend of yours and you haven't seen him for a couple of years, and you say, well, Jack, what happened to you? He says, oh, I had a terrible breakdown. And you say, my goodness, what happened? I mean, did you lose your wife or your child or your parents? He said, oh, no. I was studying geometry. And upon finding out the sum of the angles of a triangle are equal to two right angles, I just couldn't take it and I collapsed. Of course, once again, you roar with laughter because, you know, nobody cares. We are interested to know what it is, but I don't care what it is, as long as I have the answer. When it comes to ethics, the thing is very different. When it comes to metaphysics, God exists or God does not exist. There is an objective truth to which I must submit, or there is none. I may not commit adultery. I may not commit fornication. I may not do so and so and so and so. And suddenly I say, but I want to do it. I'm a person, I have free will, I'm an independent individual. Why should I submit to these taboos? You know, this is what is going to happen. So my husband is going to analyze in great detail throughout his life the phenomenon of what he calls moral blindness. And let me sketch very rapidly, I'm sorry to say superficially, what he means by it. Sometimes you can be morally blind because you live in a society when certain immoral things are done, and again everybody does it, and so on and so on. It's not even challenged. You take, for example, the question of sexual mutilation of little girls in Africa. It is something that has been done for centuries and centuries and centuries, and it is being done. And when you start thinking about it, it's a moral abomination. But as long as a society is self-enclosed, and this has always been done, nobody is going to question whether it is legitimate or illegitimate. We've always done it. And you're going to find that in every or most culture, the fact that something has always been done is accepted as being the right thing to do. And basically, when you read the Apology of Socrates, you know, as written by Plato, Socrates was condemned to death because he was challenging practices of Greek politicians that had always been done, and he challenged them. He said it's wrong. And so to speak, he was the enemy of the state, and he was put to death. Now, of course, there's always a possibility that someone who is particularly honest and truth-seeking will discover that what is being done in a society is immoral, and then comes a revolution. He probably will be put to death, but nevertheless, sometimes a change takes place, and today there's no doubt about genital mutilation of little girls, that other countries are aware of it, and they are conscious of the fact that it's horrible. They try to escape. In other words, it's sort of breaking down. But this is something that I can eliminate, because obviously, if you never raise the question whether something is moral or immoral, you never find the answer. But the second case is my own personal self-interest. Let us suppose that someone tells a big lie. That is happening among politicians. And I declare, I say, this is a lie, or this man is a liar. But I do something which is very similar, maybe identical, and if you accuse me of lying, what am I going to say? Oh, no, my case is totally different. You are not confusing. These two cases are radically different. In other words, I see the flaw in another person I don't see it in myself. Why? For the very plain reason that being myself, I have to live with myself, and I just don't like the thought that I'm going to carry out through the day saying, you're a liar, you're a liar, you're a liar. And then what I try to do is to exonerate myself and to find excuses. What I do is totally different. What you do, this is evil. But now comes the crucial point, and this is something that I'm going to insist upon because it is so overlooked in our society. You live in a society like ours, where the moral bastion has been deconstructed, has collapsed. You know, sexual morality and lying and cheating and making a fast buck with any means that you please, and it goes on and on and on. Now suppose that I commit adultery one day, and then my conscience pinches me. I just feel it wasn't right, but then I'm going to say, well, you know, after all it was, you find all sorts of reasons to justify it. You did a second day. You eat a third day. And I assure you, inevitably there will come one point when you no longer see that there's something wrong with it. You know, that can be true for adultery, that can be true for brutality. You see, that can be true. Let us say you take the case of abortion. You know, any sound individual who has eyes to see knows that to murder a freshly conceived human being made to God's image and likeness is an abomination. But then comes the argument, yes, but this woman has been raped. Yes, but this woman is going to and so forth and so on. And you find excuses. And then unfortunately, this terrible law was passed in 1973, allowing abortion. And then first it's for 1 month. And then it's extended to 2. And then 3. And then the next semester. And so on and so on. And today, the President of the United States, with a smile on his face, declares that he's going to veto the veto on partial birth abortion in the name of loving compassion for the mother. Now, you will notice when the question of abortion started, when many people were shocked. And today we've become so blunt that it no longer registers.
It's like the old metaphor of the frogs in the boiling water.
Absolutely.
You put frogs in cool water and you raise it 1 degree at a time. They never become conscious of the point at which it's now boiling and they're dead. Or the other metaphor.
Absolutely correct.
The closer I become to being a pig, the less I am aware of being a pig.
And the more we're comfortable about being one.
Yes.
Now, this is what my husband deplored in Germany. You know that at first they knew full well that Hitler was a wicked and bad man. There were lots of things, you know, that indicated it very clearly. And you know, when you live in that sort of society, it closes your eyes more and more and more, and finally you have concentration camps, you have one murder after another, you have millions of people that are... Well, that happens. In other words, it becomes so blunt. And you know, shortly before his death, there are 2 things that I have to say. The last talk that my husband gave was in California in March 1975. And I recall, and I never forget, he was on the podium, and he ended his talk by saying, a country that legalizes the murder of its own children is doomed.
When did he say this?
In March 1975.
Yeah, before
1.5 years before his death.
Yeah. Now this is a tremendous topic we're coming up to here, because I'm going to ask you about what your husband was doing and what he was thinking in the 20s with the Weimar Republic and the collapse of morals there and the rise of National Socialism. I wondered whether we wanted to take a minute before this conversation is over. I would love to have you mention and speak briefly about your husband's book on love and marriage, because that's all part and parcel of what we've been speaking of. And then I think that his whole confrontation with Nazis
that I would like to discuss before turning to his fight against Nazism,
yes.
because actually the work that is done on love and marriage took place in Munich before the tragedy of Nazism developed fully. I mean, the poison was already there,
yes.
but I mean, it's only in the early 30s that it became so threatening, you see,
yes.
that he just had to take a stand.
So this work was an early work.
Yes. Yes, but I mean, no, I said that was the beginning, because after Vatican II, he interrupted his opus magnum, the work that he considered to be his philosophical masterpiece on love. 450 pages, a small print, and which is, as far as I can judge, the greatest work ever written on love in the history of the Church. Totally unknown. I still hope that one day, a rich person will understand the value of this work and then finance its translation, because I mean, these things cost a lot of money. And maybe 60% of his works are not yet translated to English, which is to my mind very, very sad indeed, because we need them desperately. Now, at any rate, he was in Munich. He was getting to be more and more appreciated, was giving a lot of lectures, and he realized once again the whole question of love and marriage is a crucial existential question for all men. And he wasn't quite pleased about the way that it was presented in a sort of conventional way. And as I told you, he discussed the whole question of love and marriage with Nuncius Pacelli, who encouraged him enormously to develop this work and to write it down.
Again, Nuncius Pacelli is
Pius XII.
Best known to most of us as Pope Pius XII.
Yes, and basically they remained friends to the very end of Pope Pius XII's life. I recall that once we were in Castel Gandolfo with a whole group of American students, and the Pope was on his balcony on the first floor, and he saw my husband in the cloth, and he come up, you see, everybody was looking, so he had the joy of going up and embracing him. Well, I mean, at any rate, suppose that we turn to the question of love. And love is possibly the word which is most abused in our society. It has been dragged into smut and dirt. Anything goes. Anything, which implies some sort of passion or a fulfillment of my instincts, whatever it is, that's love. And my husband let me try to sketch very briefly what he has to say about the essence of love, which I find so very beautiful that there's absolutely no doubt about the fact that he had a tremendous influence on my own personal life. Love is a response. I cannot say to you, I'm madly in love, and then you say, with who? He says, I don't know, I'm looking for him. That doesn't make any sense. You cannot fall in love unless you encounter a person who is lovable. Love is a response to lovableness, very much as adoration is a response to what is adorable. Contrition is a response to what is guilt.
Again, what is a reality outside of myself?
Absolutely.
Yes. Can you encapsulate the rest of this in about 60 seconds?
You don't give me more than that. That's very little indeed. Well, I tried to...
I didn't invent clocks, really.
Well, it is a response to what is lovable. And if I perceive that I encounter someone who is lovable, my heart is going to be affected. It's going to be... And then I give the response of love, which is, I love you basically because you deserve it. Not because I crave for fulfillment. Not because it's going to be fun. Not because I can use as an instrument for my self-satisfaction. Because you deserve it. Very much as when I adore, I enter church and I adore. God is adorable and deserves my response of love.
So the same principle.
Yes, so the first step is, it's a response, which presupposes an awareness of an object that deserves this response.
Which touches on, if there is a major theme in all of your husband's work, it certainly is this question of the response to value and to love another And ultimately, to be joined with that other in holy matrimony is to have recognized value, in the recognized reality, recognized something exquisite. It's not just me, as you say. I'm madly in love. With whom? Oh, I don't know. It pushes me out. It takes me out of myself.
As you can say, I'm very hungry.
Yes.
What do you want to eat? I say, anything.
Yeah.
Or I'm very thirsty. What do you want to drink? I say, well, give me some liquid.
Yeah.
Or if you say, well, I mean, of course, if you take isolated sexual craving, you know, it arises independently of the object, and then you happen to look for it and use it as a means for your own self-fulfillment.
Yes.
When you said to give me 60 seconds, do you truly mean it?
They are virtually expired as we speak. So we will draw to a close this section of our ongoing conversation on the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand. Thank you so much, Dr. von Hildebrand, for your generosity in opening this up to us. Join us next time on A Night for Truth as our conversation continues on the work of Dietrich von Hildebrand.